how did a small town, relatively small in stature physics guy become such a good leader? Like, who were your mentors? What did you do to learn about how to become such a positive, optimistic leader, somebody that so many people look up to? Like, how did you learn how to do all this stuff?
Well, my dad was an example. He wasn't a leader by your definition of it. He never had a supervisory job in his life. Okay, he was a laborer. He ran a piece of machinery called a drag line. That was his skill, and he was satisfied with that. And his spare time, if he had any, he ran cattle with his brother and made a few bucks there occasionally. But my dad was a people person. My dad could make friends with you in 2 minutes. Come into a room, and even though he was smaller, he was shorter than me. Okay, he's a short guy, not educated. Again, sixth grade education, but he knew people. He could read people, and he knew how to connect with them. And so, within a moment of meeting you, he would know a lot about you. He'd figure out, who you are, where you come from, what drives you, and he would make that conversation one you'd remember. That's a skill he had. I don't know how he got it. I never asked how he got that skill, but he had it. And I watched that. You watch your father do these things, yeah, and emulate him in some ways. And so that's one aspect of me, is this ability to pay attention to people. If you talk to somebody I've talked to, they would say he was listening to me. He was paying attention to me. And I think that's an incredibly important skill for every leader to have, is to be able to listen to every person trying to talk to you, unless it's a cacophony, but and give them your full attention. Don't just simply pretend you're listening to them. Listen to them. You may not agree. They may make you angry, but you've got to tell them in your unspoken and spoken word both that you are hearing what they're saying to you. Ways to do that and ways not to do that. So that's one aspect right there. Secondly, you've already mentioned it. Don't take yourself too seriously, and don't be afraid to do any job you have to do. One thing I did with that shoveling horsemanure was just showing people that there was no job too small or dirty that I wouldn't be willing to do it.
Yeah.
And you've got to be able to lead people by letting them know that even though they may have more skills than you have in terms of doing some particular task, but it's not beneath you to do it.
Yeah.
Don't put yourself on a ladder that says you're above the tasks you ask others to do. Maybe they're better at it than you are, and therefore that's why they're doing it. But you don't want to tell them it's beneath you.
Dr. Loftin, you said something earlier there. I call it active listening. And what sometimes I'll tell my clients before, I'll be getting ready for a deposition or something like that. And I'll say, you got to listen to the question, but don't listen to the question the way I listen to my wife sometimes, where I'm already formulating in my head the answer that I want to give. I mean, really actively listen, because, not only is it good as a leader to really listen actively, but it also, man, I'll tell you what, I think one of the fundamental desires most people have is to feel like they're heard, like to feel like their concerns, their needs, their wants and desires are heard. And the other thing, when you talk about shoveling horse poo, when I first got to work, I started a big firm called Fulbright and Jaworski. And one of my mentors, a guy named Reagan Simpson, who was a partner at the time, a very, very prominent lawyer, he used to say, you need to go make copies, your own copies some of the time. You need to do some of the stuff that, you have a staff to do, but you need to know how to do all of this stuff yourself, because you got to show everybody that you're willing to do the same thing that everybody else is willing to do. I was talking to a Marine Corps officer that said, I never gave my men an order to do something that I would not have been willing to do myself.
That's exactly right.
And I'll ask you maybe one final question, Dr. Loftin. And I've asked a lot of my guests this question. We're in difficult times right now, pandemic, racial unrest, police issues, politics are crazy, things like that. We've got an election coming up soon, and things are just hard for people. So give us your kind of outlook over the next 6, 8, 12 months. Like, what are you telling people that because, for example, I'm telling my kids, you got to be mentally flexible. Like mental flexibility is a big thing in my house. Resilience is a big thing in my house right now. So what are you telling the people that you're around about what the future holds?
Well, there's some pretty upset people right now on both sides of the spectrum. I mean,
Yeah.
I know that. I have friends that don't necessarily fall into political pockets exactly, or political piles exactly. So I hear all of it, and I have a couple of things I tell them. I say, first of all, this too shall pass. I mean,
Yeah.
if you know history at all, you know this country has gone through a lot of turmoil politically over and over again. We kind of forget about it for a while. We have a decade or two of quietness. Come to this, and people think this is all new. It's never happened before this way. We've had just the kind of divisive politics you're hearing today, 150 years ago, that we have right now. So
Yeah.
that's one thing to keep in mind. Have perspective that this is not a singular moment in our history. This is something that we've been through before, and somehow this place has continued and even prospered in spite of that. That's just the way we are here. We are a resilient nation. We are put together by some very wise people who had some very, very good thoughts about how to govern. And they got that because they looked at all the governance going on in the world at their time and tried to pick the very best elements of that and put it together in a new nation, and did a darn good job of that, in my opinion. So I have great faith that we're going to be able to get through this current situation here of great divisiveness and great rhetoric on both sides, and still be okay in many people's minds. So that's why I would tell people, just don't lose your own integrity, your own ideas, your own concepts of what we should be doing here. Have them and promote them to those around you. But just realize that because we don't agree, all of us agree on one thing, that's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
There before, over and over and over again, from the beginning of our nation to the current day, this has happened many times, and not all exactly the same way, but the kind of divisive politics we see right now has been a repetitive feature of America's landscape, and we cannot forget that, and yet we do. We just don't have a very good way to look backwards unless you read history enough, and I do that. I try to read history enough to really know how things used to be. So I have great faith in us. It's a moment when we're all uncomfortable, perhaps in some respects, but okay, it'll pass.